We had bad weather on Friday, and some commuters simply could not make it to class. Thus, even though I hate to speak on behalf of other people, I'm going to summarize some of what Valerie Lamont had to say about reading. And for those of you who couldn't make it to class, I'm sorry you have to hear this with my voice rather than hers. I wish I had a picture of Valerie to show you, but I don't. Valerie was a librarian here at Pitt Titusville for 23 years, until she retired a few years ago. She was a history major in college with a particular interest in medieval history. Valerie began with a handout from an online New York Times article with a headline, "Reading Makes Us Nicer and Smarter People," or something like that. I don't have it in front of me at this moment. The point of the article is to discuss the diverse benefits that come with reading. Valerie made some of the same points I did about reading expanding the mind, but she also made a big point of saying that reading improves our language and writing skills, even though we're not often aware of it. The more we look at words and sentences that are used well, the more we develop an intuitive sense of how to use language, even though we might not be able to articulate the grammar rules. And that is certainly true. Valerie's reading has led her down some interesting life paths. In 1982, Valerie read a book by a new writer of historical novels, Sharon K. Penman. The book was The Sun in Splendor. It was about the 15th century English king Richard III, in whom Valerie has a great interest. Valerie liked the book very much, so she wrote a fan letter to Sharon Penman telling her that. And Sharon Penman responded, and they struck up a friendship. As Sharon Penman began her second novel, she asked Valerie to be a reader for her rough draft. So she sent Valerie rough drafts of each chapter as she got them done. Valerie commented and returned them. This relationship continued to grow for years, to the point that by the time Sharon Penman was on her 7th book, I think, she took Valerie to France with her. Valerie speaks French, so Valerie functioned as a research assistant and translator. As of 2014, Valerie and Sharon Penman have made 3 trips to France together and 1 to England. I realize that is an unusual thing to happen, but it is an interesting story of how reading has enriched a life. Valerie also talked a bit about a little essay of hers that was published in an anthology called Woodstock. As I guess you know, Woodstock was a 3-day music festival in the Catskills of New York in, I think, 1968 or 9. It was a defining event for the 60s counterculture, I guess, and it represented an important moment in the history of rock and roll. Depending upon who you are, Woodstock was a scandalous event full of drugs and free love and immorality, or it was a robust expression of peace and harmony and dissent against the social and political establishment that had gotten us into the Vietnam War. In any case, Valerie was there, and years later wrote an essay entitled Ribbons of Humanity that captured her impressions of the moment. Her essay was accepted into the anthology, and she made the point that had she not been a reader, she wouldn't have known how to go about capturing her impressions on the page. Valerie also talked about some books she liked, and being a librarian, she has a concern for those who struggle with reading and just don't like to read. She encourages reluctant readers to consider graphic novels. They're kind of like upscale comic books. She brought one and showed it to the class. She said it's a place to start. And she also encouraged reluctant readers to find short books. She brought in a couple of science fiction and fantasy novels, but I didn't write them down and can't offhand remember the titles. But she also brought in George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, which is a long novel, but she strongly recommends it for those who have the time and the reading skills to tackle a longer novel. In terms of the advantages of reading, Valerie also talked about the life satisfactions of belonging to online reading groups, of which she belongs to 2 or 3. These groups not only carry on constant discussions of books that the members have read and authors that they like, but these folks get together once a year or so for sort of like family reunions. Valerie calls them her reading families, and she has many friendships that have lasted over many years through those reading groups. Valerie mentioned that when her husband Lowell died, it was a really hard time for her. Lowell's death particularly brought on some economic hardships, and one of Valerie's reading families collected $1,000 and sent it to her to help address some of those financial emergencies. Again, it's an unusual story, but it's an interesting story of how reading has enhanced a life in unexpected ways. So, for those of you who couldn't make it to class on Friday, I'm sorry. This summary does not do justice to Valerie's comments, but perhaps it's better than nothing. The paper assignment says that you must attend all talks to get full credit for the paper, and that for every talk you miss, your grade will be lowered 25%. Because of the weather problems on Friday, if you missed, you can use this podcast to complete your paper, and the 25% rule won't count against you. However, make strong efforts to get to class, because I won't be able to make a podcast for every speaker. Good luck with the papers.